Lastly, civilization as gulag. Civilization as gulag. In his intuitive history of the megamachine, Freddie Perlman describes how a Sumerian Ensi, or overseer, lacking the rationalizations of the ideology of progress, which are routinely used to vaccinate us against our wildness, might see the newly issued Colossus. He might think of it as a worm, a giant worm, not a living worm, but a carcass of a worm, a monstrous cadaver, its body consisting of numerous segments, its skin pimpled with spears and wheels and other technological implements. He knows from his own experience that the entire carcass is brought to artificial life by the motions of the human beings trapped inside, the Zeks who operate the springs and wheels, just as he knows that the cadaverous head is operated by a mere Zek, the head Zek. It is no accident that Freddie chose the word Zek, a word meaning gulag prisoner that he found in Solzhenitsyn's work. It was not only to emphasize that civilization has been a labor camp from its origins, but to eliminate the parallels between the ancient embryonic forms and the modern global work machine presently suffocating the earth. While the difference in magnitude and historical development are great enough to account for significant contrasts, essential elements shared by both systems, elements outlined above, position both civilizations in a polarity with primal community. At one extreme stands organic community, an organism, in the form of a circle, a web woven into the fabric of nature. At the other is civilization, no longer an organism, but organic fragment reconstituted as a machine, an organization, no longer a circle, but a rigid pyramid of crushing hierarchies. Not a web, but a grid expanding the territory of the inorganic. According to official history, this grid is the natural outcome of an inevitable evolution. Thus, natural history is not a multiverse of potentialities, but rather a linear progression from Prometheus's theft of fire to the International Monetary Fund. 1 million and more years of species life experienced in organic communities are dismissed as a kind of waiting period in anticipation of the few thousand years of imperial grandeur to follow. The remaining primal societies, even now being dragged by the hair into civilization's orbit along its blanched frontier, are dismissed as living fossils, lacking in evolutionary promise, as one philosopher characterized them, awaiting their glorious inscription into the wonderful machine. Wondrous machine, even. Thus, as Freddie Perlman argued, imperialism is far from being the last stage of civilization, but is embedded in the earliest stages of the state and class society. So there is always a brutal frontier where there is empire, and always empire where there is civilization. The instability and rapidity of change, as well as the violence and destructiveness of the change, both belie empire's claim to natural legitimacy, suggesting once more an evolutionary wrong turn, a profoundly widening disequilibrium. The frontier expands along two intersecting axes, centrifugal and centripetal. In the words of Stanley Diamond, civilization originates in conquest abroad and repression at home. Each is an aspect of the other. Thus, outwardly, empire is expressed geographically, northern Canada, Malaysia, the Amazon, etc., the ocean bottoms, even outer space, and biospherically, disruption of weather and climate, vast chemical experiments on the air and water, elimination and simplification of ecosystems, genetic manipulation. But the process is replicated internally on the human spirit. Every Zek finds an empire, in miniature, wired to the very nervous system. So too is repression naturalized. The permanent crisis in character and the authoritarian plague legitimated. It starts with frightened obedience to the archon or patriarch, then moves, by way of projection, to a violent, numbed refusal of the living subjectivity and integrity of the other, whether found in nature, in woman, or in conquered peoples. At one end of the hierarchic pyramid stands unmitigated power. At the other, submission mingles with isolation, fragmentation, and rage. All is justified by the ideology of progress, conquest, and subjugation of peoples, ruin of lands, and sacrifice zones for the empire, self-repression, mass addiction to imperial spoils, the materialization of culture. Ideology keeps the work and war machines operating. Ultimately, this vortex brings about the complete objectification of nature. Every relationship is increasingly instrumentalized and technicized. Mechanization and industrialization have rapidly transformed the planet, exploding ecosystems and human communities with monoculture, industrial degradation, and mass markets. The world now corresponds more closely to the prophetic warnings of primal peoples than to the hollow advertising claims of the industrial system. The plants disappearing and the animals dying, the soils denuded along with the human spirit, vast oceans poisoned, the very rain turned corrosive and deadly, human communities at war with one another over diminishing spoils, and all poised on the brink of an ever greater annihilation at the push of a few buttons within reach of stunted, half-dead head Zeks in fortified bunkers. Civilization's railroad leads not only to ecocide, but to evolutionary suicide. Every empire lurches towards the oblivion it fabricates, and will eventually be covered with sand. Can a world worth inhabiting survive the ruin that will be left?